This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to Confronting the Line. And speaking of cults, I have who's quickly becoming a dear friend, Chris Shelton, with me today. And one of my favorite deconstruction buddies, as it were, about all things culty. And just really have loved playing with you, Chris, and learning from you. And I, as I'm cleaning out my closets, I'm like running into all these old documents. So I called Chris last week and I said, hey, let's get on and record a show and let's look at some of these core ideas that are pervasive through all the different kinds of groups, high control groups. It's made its way into personal coaching for people who kind of follow these ideas as truisms. But there's some core, in Landmark, we call them distinctions. I think in Nexium, they call them tech. What was the word in Scientology, Chris, for was it technology? What's
Technology is all of the methods and techniques and theories and procedures of Scientology. That's the tech.
Okay. So
Very
next
scientific,
very
technical.
Okay. Everyone's going to have the technology, but mostly to most people that participate in the Landmark lexicon, it's the distinctions, which was really funny. Part of my kind of pulling stuff apart a little bit when I first started doing that in about 2022. A dear friend of mine, we were reading different books together and we actually looked up the word distinction and discovered it wasn't a noun. And we're like, just laughed because how it's used is a noun, it's a thing and not a process or a happening or a comparison, right? It's a noun. It's like these things. And probably because they had to change the word from tech, if that's what Scientology had. So part of how this came up, folks, was Chris and I were having a chat a couple of weeks ago, and I happened to mention something about choice, which is a big, big aspect of the initial program that folks do in the Landmark Lexicon, the forum. But then it's referenced and used a lot. And then as a graduate, it's something we sort of assimilate. Like when I feel like I'm not having power, I just have to get choice. I just have to get a choice in the matter. And then Chris asked me, well, what do you mean by choice? And so I was explaining it and he about fell off his chair laughing. So I thought we would start there.
Yay.
Because and it's so funny because it's really only in talking to people outside of that ecosystem do you start to be able to really examine it. And I learned this from an academic a long time ago when I was working in the Being a Leader project. We were working with all these academics, and this person who studies and teaches about systems said the only way to actually really see and understand a system is to fully surrender to it and then get out of it. That you from it.
I can see where he's coming from.
Right? Like it's kind of the fish in the fishbowl. When you're in the water, you don't know water, but you get out of the water and all of a sudden you know a whole bunch about water, right? So, but if you can live outside the water and really examine it and start to sort of study it and look at it from a different perspective, and that's to me fundamentally what deconstruction is. It's like, what is that? Is that real? Is that true? But you're not asking those questions from inside of the indoctrination of it. You're outside and examining it. So choice, as I have understood it and used it over all the years, as it's taught in Landmark, and it's taught different ways in different areas, different eras, as it were. But mostly it is folks will be familiar with vanilla chocolate chews. And then vanilla choose. And the power of it is to choose life the way life is. That's as I understand it, the way that it was mostly meant. Choose it the way it is. All right. Well, that doesn't sound bad, right? Like, okay, Werner used to say this thing to me all the time. He goes, yeah, I wish I had 3 arms, but I don't. Which I think was his way of saying, choose life the way life is. Which, and I now do a lot of spiritual study. There's some value to that for sure. And that's one of the things I love about deconstruction too, is it's like finding out, we call this confronting the line, because for me, it's like step to the line, have the courage to step to the line and look both ways. Look at the healthy use and the unhealthy use. Because when you're in these groups, as I was, you don't imagine an unhealthy use. You don't know. You really don't know there's an unhealthy. There's kind of if you're a leader, as I was, you kind of know, no, that's a misapplication of that distinction, but you don't know that it's actually dangerous. And I had somebody call me up the other day and tell me a story about being 12 years old and being at the Sunday night of a Landmark Forum. And her share, in the coin of the realm in these groups is to have the biggest breakthrough and transformation of anybody in the room. That's how you win the prize. And she was sharing about choosing her father. And everybody's crying and her family's there. And they're like, and the family had left the father and da 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 da. Except for what nobody knows is that father is a pedophile. And so the whole room of people, 150 people are applauding and, oh my gosh, and here's this 12-year-old girl, height of, the beginning of separation and rebellion, and she chooses her father just the way he is. And I had a similar experience in the forum. I chose my father and my mother. Alan, my forum leader, put the two youngest people in the room up on the stage and said, "These is your mother and father." And in that moment, I was like, wow, okay, those are just people. My mother was barely 18. My dad was 21 when I was born. And so I had a kind of compassion. But the thing that work and the way it's presented so often, it doesn't account for all those other situations, like my friend whose father was a pedophile and was abusing the girls. And I believe they got back together for a period of time out of that. So this stuff can be dangerous. And that's why I want to talk about it, because nobody's talking about the danger side. So anyway, anything you just want to say about that choice or what you remember from that conversation? Like, it was just so funny.
So many.
Through Chris's eyes, I saw choice in a very different way.
Well, and bounded choice, which is what cults are all about, which I'm sure we can talk about, limiting your choices, binding your choices. But even the concepts that are communicated or delivered are based on, fundamental ideas that are very debatable as to whether they're true or not. But cult leaders don't hesitate to give them to you as truths and base an awful lot of things on stuff that really is very flimsy. Very, very maybe not so true. And when you're making life choices on those kind of principles, it feels very heady. It can feel very wild in the moment, but it ultimately is not really good for you. And that's kind of why we call them destructive cults. So that's,
There's something I want to ask you. So you just made reference to cult leaders, and that's one of the things I want us to kind of begin to look a little bit beyond, because I think that if we make it about the leaders, like sometimes I know for me, and you keep talking to me about the different levels of deconstruction, as it were, right? And so the first level is like, something's not right here. And very often, and for me, that did come up as I just, found out about the physical abuse that was happening from the source of Landmark. That is what kind of shook me up. But quite honestly, that isn't what separated me from the group, because I found out about that 3 years before I would say started to really separate mentally. I'd separated. I was mostly kicked out, honestly. I mean, when they threatened me in 2020 that if I did any business with any of their customers, they would sue me and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? I'm a friend. I'm the one I just made $2 million for your guy. And like, what are you talking about? Why are you threatening me? But that had me have to really go like, wait, I don't think they are who I thought they were. And I don't know that I am who I thought I was either, right? And so that was kind of the beginning for me. But I think that if we make it about dear leader, kind of past those initial moments, we're kind of missing something, because what I've seen is when I wrote my book, it was about me coming to grips with what I had discovered about dear leader, as it were. But then, and the cognitive dissonance that created. But what I found out with all the people who've come to me since my book came out is that the abuse that was around dear leader in Landmark is actually the culture of Landmark. And now what I'm starting to see is it's a feature, not a bug. I thought it was a bug, but I think it might be a feature. And I think like this conversation we were having about choice starts to point to that, because it does bind you in a particular way, like, oh, choose it the way it is. All right. Again, has some philosophical and emotional benefit in a certain way. Like I'm sure I'm not vassaled enough in Buddhism. John Atack would have to fill that in for us.
Well, and I, of course, immediately think of existentialism, right, which is a large swath of philosophy, which has a lot of different possible ways of thinking about basic fundamentals like that. What is, this kind of thing. How do we come to accept this, right? I mean, you can go everything from Nietzsche's nonsense to, Camus and absurdism and how you have to kind of laugh and, hey, Sisyphus, imagine Sisyphus happy, these whole things. So there's a lot of different approaches over the last many thousands of years to these questions. This is what I was, this is also what I was alluding to earlier with those philosophical sorts of conundrums.
Mm.
And the utility that they give us to spark off amazing, wonderful, fun conversations, but also for more predatory types to use to fascinate and then manipulate and then ultimately control.
So let's talk about that. So how do you see, or have you seen something like choice or choosing what is be weaponized or used against? I'm trying to remember exactly how our conversation went, but it was something. I know when we were talking about it a couple of weeks ago, there was something about like, wow, how handy for a high control group. Because then however you're experiencing it is your choice, not what I'm doing to you, not what the environment or the culture. And that's why I kind of want to get a little bit bigger than the dear leader level, because
absolutely
it may start there. Maybe that's how you get introduced to an idea, but then you internalize that idea. You accept it, you take it on, and then it becomes a kind of truth for living. And then lots of little leaders, the baby leaders go out and teach that. But they don't understand it a lot. That's another thing I've seen is a lot of these leaders, myself, I would even add to this, don't actually understand what they're teaching. They're recreating what they're teaching. And mostly in the pursuit of the moment of, the experience they had in that moment. I mean, when I got to choose my dad, he left when I was 2.5, and I had a born again Christian mother and a partying, drug addicted, alcoholic dad who was a lot of fun. But, two very different environments, and letting my parents be who my parents were and letting go of my expectations. And that creates some freedom for me. Sure. But it didn't heal the wound. It didn't change the circumstances. I'm doing a lot of that work now through other modalities that are more oriented towards doing that type of emotional and spiritual work, which Landmark is not. It's kind of, people try to pretend it is, but it's not. Yeah, so it sort of sets up this way, and I've definitely seen it. Oh, well, choose. Like, you don't like the way we're doing business? Well, too bad. If you want to be a leader in this organization, you need to choose it so that you can that's the first step to bringing yourself to be the source. Oh, I just got it for myself. Yeah. So you can bring yourself to being the source of it, begins with the choice of it.
That was the point that I found so funny. Right? Because it's loading the language. We talk about this. We've gone over this. When I say we talk about something in the cult world, this is a major, major part of the 8 things that create a thought reform, brainwashing environment, right? Or instance or event is you take language. Language is incredibly powerful because it's the means of communication and understanding between people. And you enter little twists and little corruptions into the understanding of these words and these concepts, these little twisties that create an internal culture, an internal world understanding for the cult, for the group, that is separate, different from what people outside the group understand. And your use of choice just now was perfect, exactly what I'm talking about. You choose this ideal situation that you don't like at all. You don't want to be part of it at all, but you're going to choose this. And now it's on you. And this is going right to the heart of these fundamental concepts that these groups play with. And responsibility is one of these concepts, and choice is another one. And the very framework of the universe itself. I mean, you can really trace it down to stuff like this. I know Werner doesn't, he's a little more secular. Hubbard in Scientology was a lot more spiritual, but the concepts they're playing with are existential concepts. They're what is, what isn't, what is true, what is not. These are big, heady ideas, and they have a lot of power in them when you use them to control people or manipulate them.
Well, I think that's the surprising thing. People like me just couldn't imagine that they would be used in that way. God, there was something you just said before we go into responsibility that had me think about choice. What was it? I make notes, but the whole, the compromise. It sets you up for compromise as you move into roles of accountability. Like, okay, but I chose it. Oh, but I chose it. But I chose it. But I chose it. Now I want to give you the female perspective though. So, because as a woman, so they estimate 1 in 3 of every woman, and they, I mean, even the social scientists that study this think that is probably underestimated. But in terms of reporting, 1 in 3 women have experienced assault or harassment of a significant matter. And I tell this story often, but I had a situation with somebody who sort of, and when I was a new leader, and kind of stalked me and to get me to make the choice to have sex with him. And then I did eventually say, okay, fine, thinking if I did, he'd go away, which is really wrong, ladies. I know that now at 56, but at 31, I didn't know. But there I was, a brand new leader, and I was very, empowered by the idea of 100% responsibility and being at choice and So it turns out this person was doing that with a lot of other people, and somebody else much smarter than me called the cops. And I do want to give a shout out that Landmark actually handled this situation very well. They blacklisted this guy. They got involved with the police investigation. Like in this particular moment, it is something that they handled quite well. I still say that to this day. And they
a definite rarity in those circumstances with those.
Landmark was very, and still is actually very cognizant of trying to be a business, a legit functioning integrous business. They just don't understand their own culty roots, basically. So I want to just acknowledge that, because I always acknowledge where they did something great. I'm just as happy to acknowledge that as when they do something terrible. So, but the police officer eventually comes to me and he's like, did this person force you? Were you raped? He's like asking me all these questions. And you could almost, when I look back on it, I can almost see the police officer was like trying to get me to get it. And I just kept saying, no, it was my choice. I chose. I said, yeah,
And the kind of power I'm talking about, when you use the right words and the right twist on it, look what happens.
Yeah.
You can literally tell a cop, but nah, it was on me.
Yeah. And
that's power.
It wasn't until the Me Too movement that the whole kind of like emotional, like I went, whoa, wait a minute. Yes, I did say yes, but I didn't quite have the word coercion yet. But I was heavily coerced, really hounded, actually. And it happened to be at a time, I don't think we can separate this stuff from the context of the times we were in. I was all in my like newly separated, I can do anything a man can do better, including have sex whenever I want with whoever I want, and blah, 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 blah. Like, so, all of that was in the mix too. So, but these distinctions gave an extra kind of permission to the perpetrators. And now that I work with women a lot, I host a women's group, and we've had a lot of really frank conversations about this. And I would say it's been a very, very common experience for women to accept responsibility for things that was not their responsibility, to claim choice where they had no choice, because claiming choice gives you a sense of power. But it's a false sense of power.
That's right.
I wrote an article recently about the vilification of victim, that honestly, I think we need to be okay going, you know what, I was victimized. Because if I can't confront that fact, I can't then be party to holding the perpetrator to account. If it's all on me, if it's all my choice, all my responsibility, and we all know the tropes about your skirt was too short, you had one too many beers, whatever, so you asked for it. I mean, women have been dealing with this for a lot longer than these cults have been around. But then these human potential cults come along and continue to give a kind of permission structure that I think is quite unhelpful, to be polite.
Very, very much so. Let me also throw out that the word victim itself is often the target of this kind of manipulation too. In Scientology, there are no victims. Victim is a bad word. It's a culturally inappropriate word. It's a word that's frowned upon in the culture of Scientology, I mean.
Yeah.
And this is purposefully done, of course, because when there are no victims, then perpetrators will face no consequences.
Right.
Right? Because nobody's ever a victim, are they?
Right.
You chose this.
Yeah, Landmark inherited that. They watered it down a
Oh.
little, but I think our culture in general, I mean, I can only speak from the United States because that's where I grew, but our culture in general has been the worst thing you can be is be a victim. And I've lost count of the number of women that I've spoken to and worked with that are like, no, 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 no. But it wasn't, I got to take on my part. And even if I get to the place where I can say, hey, that person was wrong, that abuse was wrong, that wasn't right, but I'm still not a victim. And that still leaves you cut off from your own healing.
Oh, very much.
In my experience, because you have to at some point go, you know what? I was powerless in that situation, and I need to somatically, emotionally address that, or I'm living in resistance to it, denial of it. I can't actually, you can't heal without processing it, without actually moving it, without actually engaging whatever it is that wants to be healed or is ready to be healed. So if I can't engage with it, I can't heal it. So, and these ideas that are taught in the name of healing, in the name of transformation and whatever, actually can get in the way if you don't really understand the tool. That's great. Well, anything else about choice? And then let's move on to responsibility. It's friend.
Well, these are the deep concepts. I'd like to, I don't usually do this, but since we're kind of talking conceptually about these things, just go a little high-minded for a second, right? It's like, what is it that these groups are playing with? They're playing with these deep ideas that they're trying to convince you. And I think one for one, from one group to the next, you'll find these are generally true. There's always exceptions, I think.
Sure.
I'm not trying to write the 10 laws of manipulative groups here, but
right.
I here's some ideas that I had, right? Of things they're trying to convince you of. And there's only a few of these fundamental concepts. Anything is possible. Anything's possible. It's an introduction to the world of magic, the world of potential. That maybe magic.
Human potential. That
potential is the right word.
Potential is
opportunity. It's an unrealized reality. And yet it's possible. Anything is possible. Now, children are told, I remember growing up with Doug Henning, right? Anything's possible in the world of magic. And it's magic. It's fake. It's lights and cameras and all this kind of nonsense, right? But this is different. This is crossing the line to no. This is real. The magic's real. It's real. Yeah. And it's convincing you of that. And once that door opens, that things you thought were absolutely positively impossible, and you were probably right, these new ideas come in. Comes you and your relationship with these possibilities or magic. And you have to connect to that, which means that you're at the root of everything that is happening to you. You're the common denominator. You are the one that it's all occurring to, and you want answers. You want to understand your relationship with yourself, with the things around you, and ultimately maybe all the way up from your family and your pet to God and everything in between.
Yeah.
So there's that relationship thing. You want to understand that, and you're at the heart and root of it all. And then comes one more little brick in this little equation that is put together for you. You're the one in charge.
Yeah, that's the responsibility piece.
Whether it's responsibility or possibility,
source,
opportunity, or source, or causation, there are so many words that
manifestation.
That's right. Or transformation. I mean, all these words lead, right? This loading of the language around these concepts is I think really, really fundamental to what joins or ties these things together in this sort of what you might think of as a web of manipulation, right? They're building blocks to lead you down a path where you've accepted these things as true, and therefore, and then the outcome, the therefores, right? Well, if this and this, therefore, right? And now we can start targeting you and putting responsibility on you for things you have nothing to do with, never did, and never could.
Do you have an example?
Absolutely. In fact, let's go to Scientology for a second, because I
Okay.
pulled this up. This is 1951, and I was actually more than a little surprised. I've seen a bunch of landmark material, but when you were quoting from your, from your memory on some of this responsibility stuff, I was like, that's
The willingness to be
really familiar. Let me just read this straight to you. This is straight Scientology, 1951. Definition: responsibility is the ability and willingness to assume the status of full source and cause for all efforts and counter efforts on all dynamics, meaning all phases of life from yourself all the way through to God and everything in between.
Okay, what would a counter effort be?
I want to get a job, or I want to mow the lawn, and you don't want me to mow the lawn because you want me to clean my room.
Okay.
Effort, counter effort.
Gotcha.
That's simple.
All right.
That's simple. And Hubbard says definition of a problem: effort, counter effort. Intention, counter intention makes a problem.
Okay.
Right? So that's the simplicity of that. So responsibility, and this is basic, fundamental, and core Scientology. Every Scientologist learns about this and knows this and practices this. This is not deep minutia buried in some ancient text. This is very, very front and center Scientology. Ability and willingness to assume the status of full source and cause for all efforts and counter efforts on all dynamics. In and of itself, that definition means absolutely nothing. It means you're making a decision. I'm assuming the status of full and knowing cause.
So in the landmark version, I'm 100%, the willingness to take, and we would even teach people, it isn't that you actually are.
Yes.
It's the willingness to assume that causation,
That's
to
right.
assume that, which is, so I'm going to play the counter side a little bit, which it feels powerful. I used to tell people all the time, like, you pull up to the light, it turns green, take the credit. Why not? But here's the thing that I also said that goes missing a lot, which is it's not real that you turn the light green. Like, you have to there was this guy, I have to look it up. There's a guy on John Atack, psychologist. You might know who it is if I talk about it enough. But he was talking about if we could actually harness and bring consciousness to our ability as human beings to live in a virtual reality and reality. Like, if we could hold both, we could probably deal with some stuff. Because basically the point he was making, they were talking about video games, I think. Here's the point he was making, is that some of our dark side, some of the things that we have compulsion to do but shouldn't do. Like, think about, how everybody always says gun violence is because of video games, even though, folks, it has been proven not true, because there are societies like in Asia with way more video games and way less violence. So this guy was kind of talking about that a little bit. And part of what he was saying was that if we could, like, this is my fantasy life and this is my real life, and actually hold them as distinct, it would be an interesting kind of power. I was very struck by that, because it made me think about these distinctions, made me think about responsibility, the willingness to be 100% responsible, even though I actually know I'm not. And then even though I know, like, I can't control my ex-husband. So I had an ex-husband that was abusive to my son, was abusive to me. And, I spent 7.5 years being responsible for that relationship and trying to change it and fix it and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so when I hit the landmark point of it, I was like, okay, well, if I can own this relationship. Now, eventually I owned it, that, yes, I had chosen to get in it, so I could choose to get out of it. So it had a happy ending, even using. So that's what I mean. There are healthy uses, I think, of these ideas. But part of that rests on understanding that you aren't actually source or cause of that car that ran into you, that T-boned you.
See,
or that bus that hit you.
Yeah. See, well, let me give you a little bit more, because see, what you did is you watered it down in your mind in order for it to make sense.
Well, Landmark watered pretty much everything from Scientology down. Yeah, I'll give them a tiny bit of credit for the watering down.
Oh yeah. Because this is awesome. Let me see if I can find it, because there it is right here. Okay, this is the paragraph exactly written by L. Ron Hubbard that addresses what you're talking about there. A soldier shot on the field of a battle may blame the sniper, the selective service, the stupidity of government. But, italicized, he nevertheless had full responsibility not only for being there and getting shot, but for the sniper, selective service, and the stupidity of government.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So here's the thing about ideas, right? Is that ideas are contextual. And yes, there are contexts where any idea can make some sense and can be utilized in a constructive way. I will grant that that is true for any idea. I don't have the idea that there are inherently evil ideas any more than I have the idea there are inherently evil books that should be banned, this kind of thing. Ideas are a dime a dozen. We have 1 million of them a day. It's what you do with them. And when you utilize these ideas, as L. Ron Hubbard did, and as Warner certainly did, to manipulate and control people to make choices they wouldn't have otherwise made in directions that are destructive to them financially, psychologically, relationship-wise, then you're crossing those lines. And those are the points that we're always trying to demark for people. Here's the red flags. Here's where it goes too far. And then we come out and we realize that these ideas are contextual, that we thought they were true all the time. At least I sure did.
Yeah.
Hey, surprise, they're not always true. And there's times when they're very, very not true. And so I just wanted to kind of address that point because it's a thing that comes up often in the X world. Well, I know that I'm supposed to hate all of this, but this was kind of good. It's okay. It was all kind of good in certain contexts, right?
Right.
But you can't let that rationalize away the times that it was destructive and it hurt people.
Well, and you have to be, this is the thing that I'm learning, and this is why I'm so passionate about confronting the line, and for practitioners, if you want to be a safe practitioner, something I talk about all the time, you have got to take your blinders off and you have got to study the dark side. You have to understand the dark side, or I don't care how good intended you are, what a great heart you have, you are inadvertently going to do harm with these ideas because the way they're taught mostly in programs like this, and I just saw something in what you said, which is the tie-in to the LGAT format and the problem with that. Because I think, and I'm doing some work with Ed Gurwitz now, who was one of the original trainers, neuropsychologist, helped actually formulate the forum. And the thing I've been struck with, the more I get to know him and work with him, I'm like, oh, these are the healthy version. But it's because he understands the unhealthy side and he includes it in the talking. But the LGAT format, which is people fixate on the large group part. Yes, that's an ingredient, but that gives you the social component where you get people going along and get, you follow the social cues, social pressure, all the influence of a group, which we as human beings are incredibly pretty much run by, actually. We're not even susceptible to. We are it. It runs us. We're not escaping that. It's part of our makeup. But you discover these ideas. So there you are in a large group awareness training, like the forum, like the advanced course. Not every program in Landmark is conducted in the large group awareness training format. Close. I mean, some are more that than others. But you have this intense experience of the freedom of taking responsibility for something which gives you this like omnipotent experience of power. And that, to me, that's the part of LGATs, is that you have this experience. And what people don't realize, I was reading a great article about this the other day, we actually remember the positive stuff way more than the negative stuff. We sort of think it's the other way around, but it's not actually. What sticks with us for a lifetime are the positive experiences. I mean, think about it. You'll remember those precious moments in your life way longer and in a way deeper way than you will the pain. Having given birth, I can promise you this. If we actually remembered the pain, this world would be depopulated a long time ago because it's bad. It's very painful. So it was really interesting. It was actually great. I'll see if I can find the article I'll send to you. It was a New York Times op-ed piece that was explaining how we get imprinted actually with the carrots way more than the sticks, which is also why we'll go back in for abuse more again and again and again and again.
No, trauma bonding, absolutely. The peak moments and euphoric moments and pleasure moments of our lives certainly have power, no question about it. I just hesitated on the whole, but we were wrong about all the negative. I'm like, I think we remember some of those too.
No, we remember some of that.
Way.
We remember it in a different way, yeah.
I'd say that's the best way to say it.
That's a good,
different way.
So I just
trauma sure isn't going anywhere either.
So I just looked up, I was curious about kind of the most recent way that Werner for sure is talking about responsibility, right? So the way I learned it in Landmark was something around the willingness to be 100% cause of the matter. So looking up the Being a Leader course, which is publicly available on SSRN and Social Science Research Network, and how they talk about it in there is being cause in the matter. So what sources say about responsibility, particularly in relation to being cause in the matter, and this is on, you can look this up and it's right there publicly available. Being cause in the matter is a chosen stand or declaration, not an assertion about facts. So you can hear the Hubbard's kind of stuff saying the similarities. It's described as a place to stand from which to view, comprehend, and deal with the facts of a situation with which you are confronted. It is a choice from which to relate to facts, not a statement about facts themselves.
Right.
Okay, fine. Except for most people then go out and they forget that whole second part. I'm 100% cause in the matter. My husband is, being an asshole and hurting me or whatever, my partner or my spouse, I'm causing the matter, which is often fed by these cycles of abuse anyway. Or Werner, the source of transformation, I heard this from some of his staff who came to me looking for help. They're like, yeah, but I really am a terrible, terrible staff member. See, that in the Landmark lexicon, that's where the abuse comes. You don't really see any of that until you get into a leadership role or a staff role. How I say it now is, as I understand destructive cult or high control group now, it's like you were really in that. As soon as you trip over into that line where you have a major accountability in Landmark, then you're kind of in the cult. But before that, you're just participating in programs offered by a cult. It's
Sure.
like,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Which is,
Absolutely.
starts to
Absolutely.
indoctrinate you and does have impact. Because I've heard from lots of people who are really struggling in their lives because they're not related to the facts. And I can't go to them as a Landmark and say, okay, but you got the distinction wrong. Oh, what we really meant was that that's a place to stand. It doesn't actually alter the facts. Because that just doesn't get used that way when it trickles down.
That. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not so different in Scientology when we talk about the culture. If I refer to the culture of Scientology, it's a culture of, and Hubbard's language contributes to this, of unreasonableness.
Oh, that's a famous one. We love unreasonable.
Yes, we did
That's
too.
the coin of the realm.
Very, very important word in Scientology. Reasonable and being unreasonable means you accept zero excuses. There is no excuse, justification, rationalization, or reason of any kind that I will accept as to why it is that you did not act in a position of cause or source or responsibility or whatever word I want to throw in there. You didn't, take that responsibility or are not, going to be responsible for this thing, no matter what it is. Now you come to me, I got fired today. Yeah, what'd you do to pull that in?
Right.
Would be a very typical Scientology question.
Right.
Not some.
Who are you being that you got fired? What did you do?
There we go.
And again, it
Right.
gives, it's interesting to me, Chris, because it gives the person, the victim,
Yep.
a way to get out of victimhood. Like it gives them a way to get out of victimization.
Yep.
That isn't real. Like I'm not for hanging out in victimhood. My whole life is organized around not being a victim, which has caused me probably as much problem as it's been value, quite honestly, because my mom was very much in that mindset. So I was going to be not my mom. Right. So that's interesting because the second paragraph, just to try what you said, what is meant by being cause and matter is this context is not related to fault, blame, shame, guilt, burden, obligation, credit, or praise. Assigning blame or credit is seen as disempowering in the exercise of leadership.
Yeah. And I believe that those kind of statements that you just read, because Hubbard includes the exact same kind of language, I'm telling you, Werner pretty much just ripped it straight from Hubbard. This is 1951. It's a book called Advanced Procedure and Axioms, by the way. If anybody wants to look it up, you'll find a wealth of stuff in there that probably translates straight into Landmark material.
Or Nexium, or life store context, or pick.
Yeah. Heavily drew from this. Yes, heavily. Keith Raniere loved L. Ron Hubbard stuff. That language is confusing, and that's the glue that makes the whole idea a stick, right? There's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of consequences and ramifications of where this goes in terms of victimhood, because Because the context, ultimately, when you are trying to establish the truth of the responsibility or causative agents of a thing, well, no matter what it is or what event you're talking about, context always matters. You got fired. I presented that as an example. Maybe it was your fault. Maybe you did something purposefully or inadvertently. Either way, maybe you did something and screwed something up and you got fired. Or maybe that's not what happened. Maybe you just didn't do anything wrong. Somebody just doesn't like you there.
Yeah.
And one day, here's your slip and you're out. And it had nothing to do with anything you could have ever done anything about. In no multiverse could you have ever changed that circumstance.
So you,
So,
oh, go ahead, finish that.
well, so where I go with this is, in one of these cases, it can be empowering to feel I could re-look at that circumstance and what I had to do about it and go, yeah, I could have done something different. I'm going to learn from that. And this is called growth. This is how we learn.
Okay.
You have to screw up to learn. There's no way around that. So, of course, we could treat it as a learning experience. And in that sense, in that situation, good. Yeah, I'm going to be responsible for being fired by looking at what I did to make that happen and changing my behavior and being better next time.
Right.
On the other hand, in a circumstance where it didn't have anything to do with you,
Which is almost all landmark firings, by the way.
as well as, you know, most of the crap that gets done to you in a cult or in most of corporate America, as well as school, as well as your hobby group, as well as, you know, it doesn't really matter what we're doing. We're very much not in the driver's seat. And that's how they get you, right? That's why I was saying at the beginning is they give you this idea, anything's possible and you're in the driver's seat. No, anything's not possible and you're not always in the driver's seat. But we're going to feed you information and then we're going to force it down your throat for all those times when you weren't responsible in any way, but we're going to tell you that you were.
Which happens to feed a societal norm of dominance, hierarchy, perpetration, abuse. Like that's my gripe. People are like, you're against transformation. I'm like, I'm not against transformation. I'm for transformation. I'm against abuse. And so I want to give the flip side example because I've had so many, this was a big part of why I wrote my book is because I wanted to, in as gentle and subtle way as I could, communicate to every former staff member I've ever known of Landmark Worldwide, it wasn't your damn fault. You worked in an organization that did not have systems and processes that work. They had no flippin' integrity. And I remember even when, and look, I worked in Happy Camp. To this day, I love the executive of my division, the manager, fantastic people, but they were also in a system. They were managing for a system and they did it as well as could be done as far as I'm concerned. That doesn't work. So I had a job, for example, where I was to produce a 10% year-over-year increase in 4 to 5 courses at a time in primarily registration, but also there were other measures registering people in the next course. I found one of my stat sheets the other day and I was like, none of this has anything to do with the difference being made. But I was convinced, because that's part of the system, is how you know transformation is real is people are bringing their friends, they're bringing their family, they're basically bringing people into the system, which is bullshit. You can have transformation and never bring a single guest. Do you hear me? Everybody turn that up loud. I'll say it again. You can have transformation and never bring a single guest to a thing ever. And you don't even have to share it. So, but as a staff member, and I said, as part of my resignation, I sat down and I said, hey guys, and funny enough, I had just done the leadership course that I went on to host, and I really got integrity in a different way. And I was like, the system has no integrity. So I've worked for 12 years trying to produce a result in a system. No integrity in Landmark means it doesn't work. It has a lack of workability. So it's like a 3-legged stool, but only 2 legs are working. So that means it's a stool with no integrity. Well, what's the no integrity? Okay, do a 10% year-over-year increase. We're not going to give you leads. Your leads are your participants that are sitting in front of you and getting them to talk to their family and friends. occasionally, maybe you could get a list of people who did the self-expression leadership we had to register senior program people who'd done all the other programs. That's who the wisdom course was for. So every once in a while, maybe you could get a list, but of course you could only talk to the ones that had had contact within 18 months, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I liken this to, now I realize, when I was taught sales in my early career, I was taught sales by a woman who owned a carpet store. And you know what? She had samples in the carpet store. She had distributors that would come by and tell you about the features and benefits of what you were selling. She had an advertising campaign that would bring customers into the door. She had, and then my job was to be there and to, convert those customers into buyers. But the job of getting the customer, that was hers. That was the owners of the store. It wasn't mine. And I'm seeing this all over the place now. Like, I experienced it in Landmark, but I'm now, I'm out in the world and everybody's trying to get you to sell their thing, except for, here's the thing, they want you to also find the customer. So they want you, that's what MLMs are based on, right? Go get, and that has now pervaded our sales.
You're the customer in MLM, but yes.
Well, you're the customer, but your job is to go get the other customers so that you'll make money. There's no centeration. Well, that doesn't have integrity. And that, I literally said that in part of my resignation. And there's a lot of things I cited in my resignation. It was time for me to leave. There was a lot. This was not the key reason I left. But I really had come to see, like, no, I couldn't be 100% cause in the matter of my own targets, because I didn't have my hands on the levers and dials. I wasn't the one who could go set up advertising campaigns. I wasn't the one, I didn't have the resources. I didn't have a marketing budget. I didn't have any of those things. I mean, the only budget I had was the budget to fly myself to the city, host a guest event, get my existing participants to bring their family and friends, that kind of thing. And to me, so then when I didn't make the target, as with every staff member, then it's time to go to work on Anne. We never looked at the system. Never.
Right. Of course not.
And if you try to bring it up,
you're at the center of it, and you're the living being causing things. So of course it's on you.
And it's always on you. It's never on the system. It's never on your manager, except for they're also probably getting processed. We call it Landmark the same way you are, but that's happening behind closed doors.
That's right. Everybody at every level and
somebody told me once that Joan Rosenberg said, look, we can't get rid of the centers model because then we don't have people to beat up for results. You know how like narcissists like spit out truth once in a while?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, let me give you an example out of Scientology, just to really show how magical thinking this can get, right? Because that is what we're talking about.
That is exactly
magical thinking, right?
Yeah, trips over.
Happen, manifest, right? Now, we never use the word manifest in Scientology. It's not a word them bandy about. But in Scientology, we use the word postulate. You would postulate something into existence. That was another point of the loaded language. But I was a course room supervisor. So I oversaw teaching Scientology. Yeah, I was course room supervisor, right? I wasn't an instructor or a teacher, because we don't have that word in Scientology, because L. Ron Hubbard is the source and not you as the teacher, right? Or the instructor. You're not supposed to know the subject. You're supposed to be the medium by which the person gets the information, and you supervise them studying direct from the source. There's a methodology to this. There's a whole training you do in order to learn how to do this job. It's a very customized job with its own tech, all these methods it has for how to teach things in Scientology. I don't have to get into all that. Point is that the size of the student body at any time, and it's an ongoing enrollment, continual attendance situation. You come into a Scientology classroom, your schedule is set with the supervisor, and you keep that schedule. You don't have to show up, Monday through Friday, 9 to 12. You can show up Monday through Friday, 1 to 3. You can show up Monday at 1 to 3, and Tuesday, 9 to 6, and Wednesday, 10 to 11 if you want to. I mean, they're going to, they're not going to like the 1 hour slot, but they try to slot you into these time slots. And the course rooms run morning 9 a.m. until 10 o'clock at night. Okay, so there's a constant stream of people in and out of these classrooms, finishing classes at their own pace and signing up for the next one and getting going on that one. And that's the ideal kind of situation for these classrooms. The size of the student body is 100% the responsibility of the course room supervisor, not the registrars, not the promo people, not the magazine writing people. All those people exist, but none of them, sorry about that, none of them have a statistic of number of people in the course room. The supervisor's job is to fill up the course room, and his magical way of doing that exclusively, because he can't leave the course room at any time during the course periods, can't go out and make phone calls, can't be standing there writing letters. You got to be supervising the students. So unless there's nobody there, then you can go out and make phone calls. But otherwise, if you got one student there, your job is to stand there and watch them and supervise them. If you got 20, you're busier. You got 20 people to watch, but it's still the same job.
Okay.
The quality of your supervision is the direct index of the size of your student body. If your student body is down to one student, you suck as a supervisor.
Yeah. And you're on the short list for getting ejected.
Your ethics and cramming and all the corrections that are going to be done on you, right? At first the velvet glove is on and you get some correction and you go over some issues and they practice and role play and drill with you and this kind of thing to make sure you're doing a good job.
Do you get stuff correlated in, like the drawers at your house are messy, or your glove box in your car? Because that was one of the things that would come up a lot in Landmark when you would get, because you're describing the structure very similarly. But you would get like, okay, well, what's in your way? What's in your way, Chris, from being effective and powerful? Oh, well, where's your integrity out? Oh, well, and after a while, if you're good at all, if you're good, you have to start grabbing further and further and further, get more esoteric for out integrity. Well, actually, my silverware drawer at home,
that's it.
The spoons and the knives are kind of mixed up, and that doesn't have integrity. So maybe that's the source of why there's no integrity in my course room. I mean, it gets cuckoo on the inside.
It can go there. Okay, it can absolutely go there exactly as you described, or alternately, such answers are flat out rejected.
Okay.
You better dig up what you're really up to. And I better start getting some real answers.
Wow.
Right. And now out come, I want to know what you're really up to. Are you doing something with kids? Like, what's going on?
Now you're in the pit or the fishbowl. It's called at Landmark too. Like, now you're like, Now
the e-meter comes out and now we're really going to go to town. Right. And maybe you're going to get an interview, or maybe you're going to get the full blown confessional, which is a very formalized procedure in Scientology, utilizing the e-meter to pressure you to confess to your crimes in this lifetime and, of course, in your past lifetimes. But you don't ever get to just jump straight to your past lives. We want to know the dirt now. That's the importance.
And you don't get to say, you can't ever say, I mean, even I remember my husband left after 18 years of being a seminar leader. Which is, he'd been a center manager and staff member for a long time, but he had left that in 2004. And this is now later, like 2008 or whatever. And he said to the person that he was accountable to when he was resigning, and my husband is Dave, very beloved, very admired in the organization. And out of 18 or whatever seminars, however many, he led a lot, only a small handful were effective by the minimal acceptable measures. But everybody loved Dave, including his participants. And so he was very effective in other ways. So mostly, I mean, he's actually had to do some therapy now on some of the processes that he was put through that were very much like what you just said. What are you doing? But I think it's important for us to distinguish this fact. So he says when he's leaving, he's like, look, Jerry, he says, look, you're asking me to be responsible, cause in the matter, of these MA results. But I walk into a seminar, I'm told there's 100 people, but there's actually only 50. But I got to produce results for 100. Like, there's no integrity. I'm being handed something that has no integrity. It doesn't work. The numbers are a lie. I don't have that don't have full teams. I'm supposed to have a team. So same thing as a seminar leader, he's supposed to stand there and take care of the students, the guests, and the team is the one doing all the work and making calls and following up on guests and registering people in the back of the room, you know, all that. So he's got to cause all that, except for he doesn't have a team. And the person, this said a lot, the person he was accountable to, Jerry, said, "You think we don't know that? We know that." And this was, we were working in the Dallas Center, which was one of the smallest centers and notoriously struggled a lot. And he's like, "We know that." And so Dave's like, "Okay, well then why don't we adjust the results so you want me to be accountable for based on what we know?" Like if we actually followed our own teaching, if there's a diminution of integrity, then we would say, look, okay, I'm not going to promise the results for this, but this is the result I will promise. So as the leader, you don't ever have the autonomy to actually have it be your word. You're forced for your word to be the word that was established by whoever, whenever. And there's not really an access to making that kind of adjustment. So
this goes right. Let's connect a couple dots right now, because what
Sure.
you're describing is the mechanism by which choice is taken away. You create arbitrary but absolute standards to be met. The bar must be here, and it must always be here, and it cannot ever be less than this. In Scientology, this is called standard tech. It's a very specific phrase for a very specific idea, which is you do exactly what Hubbard says, and you do not alter.
Right.
Right? No deviation of any kind. That is standard tech. There is only one right way to do Scientology, and that is standard tech. And if you're doing something different, you're altering it. And if you alter it, it's not going to get the results that you want. Therefore, if you're not getting the results you want, you're altering it, right? It's the whole circular logic. You know,
the relation would be in about 2000, Landmark went to, you had to reproduce exactly as written, everything. You couldn't.
It's a necessary idea in any control system. That's why I'm saying let's connect these dots, because it's how choice is taken away. You don't have a choice of making the quota or not. I don't care how unreal.
Yeah, you have to choose, make the
quota. Your rationalization. That sounds like a me problem, right? Is you don't want to make your quota. Maybe there's some issue with you should check out, because the quota is the quota. Yeah. Right? Or the policy is the policy, or the procedure is the procedure. Whatever the point is,
process is the process.
Unalterable, it is unmovable, and you're the one who has to rise to the occasion. And they've already primed you with the other fundamental ideas we went over.
Yep.
That anything's possible and you're capable. So any failure on your part to meet this unreasonable, completely insane quota is your failure to take responsibility for it. Don't you see? And this is the anatomy of this entire trap.
That's why I want to say to all the former staff members out there, all the former program leaders that left in shame and blame, and you didn't get the job done, and you cost, XYZ city transformation and possibility, that is bullshit. That it was a system that fundamentally doesn't work. And 50 years later, we can say that. We can say that because it hasn't worked. I mean, even by Landmark's own say, we did some math the other day. Their current thing says they've had 3.5 million participants, which I actually think if you did all the subsidiaries, they probably had a lot more than that. But anyway, just take their own number, divide that by, even the Landmark years, take Est out of it, and you have about 80,000 a year. You know what, folks? That isn't a human potential result. Like, that's not that great. There's just not.
Keep it up with birth rates.
Yeah. Like, that's not fantastic results. So, and that's probably one of the biggest things that you deal with there when you're fully in it, is like, this is so amazing. How come everybody's not running? So then you got to create a narrative for why people don't want possibility.
That's right. And it almost always creates an us versus them narrative of they just don't get it. They fill in the blank, right? We get it.
Okay.
We're superior. They're not. We have to raise them up. However, whatever variation on that theme, it's usually along those lines.
Wow. Yeah. Well, what I wanted us to show today was how valuable, good ideas or seeds of good ideas can be manipulated, can be weaponized, can be used, and which doesn't take away the good idea part of it. There are times in life where it's, like, okay, yeah, I'm 100% responsible. I cook a lot, that I put baking soda in twice and forgot the salt, you know?
I mean,
Okay.
exactly. There is responsibility, I'm being all emphatic right now.
Yeah.
There's obviously things we're responsible for. It's all a matter of shifting that line in the sand to a point of unreasonableness. That's
Yeah.
where you lose the plot. It's not the fact that you can be responsible that was the problem, or that you couldn't be responsible. That wasn't that odds are, when you're talking about these groups and your participation in them, that wasn't the issue, right?
Yeah.
The system is designed insidiously to manipulate you into a position where your choices are taken from you, including even your understanding of a thing, so that it's only one understanding that's acceptable. And you can't look at it any other way,
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
the trap.
Well, and because we use the term high control group, and I think a lot of people are like, well, wait, what does that really mean? Because the more I study this stuff, because the less I think we have so much less autonomy than we actually understand. It's a little bit of a talk about some magical thinking.
Yeah.
Like we don't, and this is a real problem in our society right now, because we look out there and we go, okay, everybody has equal opportunity and equal chance. Well, we know that's not true. We actually, It's been studied, it's been measured, it's been counted. In reality, it is functionally not true.
That's right.
It is functionally not true that a Black woman has the same opportunity that a white woman, have. It just isn't in our society, because we've organized things in a way that what that woman has to deal with is just different. And what she has to overcome and what I have to overcome are different things. And if we start to accept that, then we can start to rebuild these systems. And I believe we can actually start to use some of these ideas in the healthy ways. Like we could actually, if we take the time to understand and learn them. I love, love, love the episode you did on responsibility. I quote you all the time, but that responsibility is not the willingness to be cause in the matter 100% of the time. It is, what is your ability to respond?
Exactly.
What is within your ability to respond? And even that sometimes can get you in trouble as a consummate overgiver. I've gotten myself in trouble just because it's my ability doesn't mean that I should.
That's right.
But
That's right.
that's a whole other
choices
lever.
in the matter.
Yes. Yeah.
If you care to exert them, right?
Right. Well, or if I see them. That's one of the problems I have with choice. And I do think that's somewhat where people try to get to, that I've seen use the choice distinction a lot around landmark, is like, if I have fundamentally what transformation is an event in reality. I don't know how Landmark's talking about it currently, but Ed and I have been working on this from his book, and I really love the way he talks about it, which is an event in which we shift our perspective. That's a pretty amazing thing. Like that's a really, really, like you can shift your perspective, and yes, you can see new actions to take, new opportunities maybe that you didn't see before. You can elevate your confidence, and all that in that moment. And then
what is that? I'm sorry. What word is that the definition for?
It's the way he relates to transformation. Well, he calls transformation.
See, that's funny, because I'm going to okay, can I push back a little bit?
Yeah, of course. That's why I love nerding out with Chris Shelton. That's my favorite.
Let's do this for a second. Because I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that, because here's why. My experience of my own life and helping and working with others, having an idea or having a change in perspective is the beginning of a transformation. It's not the transformation itself. If you do not then act on that thought, it's just a thought. And it only ever exists here. Half transformation, I think, my definition of it involves then enacting.
Well, I have to be fair to Ed. So his definition really is practice over time in community is what creates. It's confusing, because for so many years, Landmark, Werner, like all the way back, is like, that's kind of what they're selling. And so I've taken it apart to say, this is more an Anne thing probably than an Ed thing, but is the transformation itself, like what I think of as transformation a lot, that aha moment. That's how it gets sold in Landmark. So what are you going to get in 3 days and an evening? You're going to have a peak experience. You're going to have an event, but they call that transformation.
Yes.
It isn't really. Ed's actually
it's
done a
not.
great job of making that point that transformation is practice over time and is achieved by practice over time and community. That's how he
That's right.
actually defines it. And he was there at the creation of the forum. But it gets, see, this is why I'd like to abolish just let the word go for a while altogether, because it's so misleading. A little bit like choice. That was part of what you were laughing when we were talking about choice the other day, because you were like, oh my gosh, they couldn't have picked a more perfect word to bind somebody.
Exactly.
Right? Because the word
it's all about opposites. It really is. Freedom is slavery. Orwell nailed this. He really did. This is Orwellian. And it's not the only thing that happens with language, but it's classic. It's just so interesting how the most powerful manipulations or loading of the language is when it is opposite time, when choice, and as you described it in Landmark, is literally taking away every one of your choices. You know, irony doesn't even begin to go to the depths of depravity that practice, you know, that because it messes with people in really significant ways.
Right. Yeah, it does, because you just end up misapplying it. You just end up,
And your life
assuming.
can go into a tailspin as a result.
Well, then you're not really oriented to the functional reality. Like, I don't have choice about whether it rains or not. And look, there's quite a difference between the distinctions really understood and the way they're taught and mostly understood by the majority of graduates who go out then and make all kinds of muck, because
there's the intended manipulation, and then there's
the unintended. Yeah, exactly. The unintended consequences.
That's right. That's right. I shouldn't laugh, but
it is so funny.
You're absolutely right.
Interesting. I just typed in choice. Anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, but I think this is all what I meant by confronting the line, right? Like, hey, let's start to get clear about these ideas. Where are they manipulative and misinforming and get me bound into situations that aren't healthy for me? And that's really where you have to look, right? That's the thing about destructive cult. Is this healthy for me? But the problem is you've been indoctrinated that it is. There is no other answer other than it is. And if it isn't, it's because you're not doing it correctly, not because it isn't correct. That the idea is correct.
And that's the binding of the choices. They literally bind you. I mean, it's just such a great phrase, right? Dr. Young created it. It's her modeling of how to think about a cult. There's other ways of thinking about it, but this is a very simple, very direct way of doing it. And that's the trap of it. Is you got to understand it's a trap. It's not just, oh, I had some choices taken away. It's limiting your choices to the degree that you are stuck. Well, psychologically, we didn't go here today, and we don't need to, because it's a whole show. But the glue that holds that binding in place are the double binds, the psychological contradictions where this has to be true, but this has to be true, and they can't both be true at the same time, but they have to be. And this kind of contradictory thing can be crazy making. This is old psychology stuff. This is really deep fundamental psychosis theory, but it also plays an incredibly powerful role in the kind of control that Earhart and Hubbard and people like Jim Jones practice on people. Is these double binds really keep people in place?
Would you say, I'm curious, because when you earlier were talking about, how we, know you, what's really going on with you. And then I can just hear some people would be listening to this and go, why would you ever stay for that? And lots of people don't stay for that. They go, fuck you, and I'm out of here, right?
That's right.
But then there's a lot of people that do, right? Landmark's had hundreds of staff members over time that, they're on staff for, half of a living wage and, sacrificing their family and their lives and their health and all this stuff for the transformation of life itself. So that's always the thing that's out there. Yeah. But I think there's something that you're speaking to right here, because I can hear people like, well, why did they stay for that? Why did they get in that? And I think for me, part of it is a little bit our inability to be with both things. Like, that's what it took for me to separate, is go, okay, this guy's an asshole that abuses people, and there's some good ideas here. Like, all of my 26 years of experience was not a lie. Like, I had to be able to hold both of those to come to the line and start looking. It's why I'm here talking to you today, because I can go, you know what? I did make a difference with a lot of students and people, and I had a really good time, and like all these good things happened. And it was an abusive, high control, manipulative environment that cost me a lot more than I understood at the time. I have to be able to hold both of those. And when you're in those environments, one, you're so flooded. Like it's so, when somebody's in your face going, okay, but what are you really hiding? What is the thing that you're really not saying? Your brain shuts down. I mean, you just can't, say, or you're standing in front of a room, there's 150 people in the room, there's a leader who's on a stage a little bit higher than you, is kind of omnipotent, knows that something you don't, the power structure's already set there, and you're at the mic and you're like, they're like, you're not getting it. You're like, I'm not. And there is no choice in the traditional form of choice at that point. There is no go sit down. There is no da-da. Occasionally some people break through and can do that, but then mostly you're kind of shamed to do. So
it's the group psychology aspect.
that's where the large
on in
group
those rooms.
part is kind of a problem if we don't understand how we operate in social groups. And that's where I think the onus is on the facilitators. In our Safe Practitioner Workshop, we talk about this a lot. Your job as a facilitator is you got to make it okay for people to not participate. And a little opportunity to choose at the beginning of a weekend is not sufficient.
Oh, and no, absolutely not. It's a whole attitude adjustment that's required. And let's be clear that even that is not going to solve the problem of how people are going to feel when they're sitting there in the experience of it. Because an overbearing or authoritarian seminar leader is not the only reason why people feel social pressures to agree and comply. Right? Independent of who's running the group. Just the fact you're in a room and there's judgment or potential judgment is going to set up the conditions for you to feel compelled to go along with what everybody else is doing. This is very established social science. So really, you need your seminar leaders or workshop leaders or whoever you want to call them to really counter this, like go out of their way to counter it, because all they're doing is being a little bit of a compensation against what already exists. They're not creating it all on their own. They can rev it up and make it even worse and bring more social pressure on a person. And they're kind of trained to do that with what they do. But I just wanted to make that point.
They also give a false sense of choice. And I am saying authentic choice, where I can choose between this thing or that. I can leave, I can stay, I have multiple choice.
Yeah, it's hard to exert that choice in a social situation.
Right. Well, and if the leader's kind of amping it up, and because the leader's usually also holding the carrot. If you stick with this, you're going to have a miracle. You're going to see something. You're going to have a breakthrough. You're going to have a transformation that's going to solve all these problems, solve all these feelings. So I've also seen that a lot of this work is about getting away from these yucky feelings. Now that I'm actually studying and working with feelings, letting myself have feelings, I'm like, I was telling Chris before we started recording, I'm like, sometimes I kind of want my brainwashing back where I don't have to deal with yucky feelings. Like sometimes I just want to be able to shift the context and pretend it's different, there is a kind of magical thinking in there. But so that's interesting. It kind of that tension between the possibility and the leader and then the group that's like there and they're cheering you on and they're just like, come on, you can see it. And when I read the stuff I started reading recently some of the stuff about the brainwashing, right? All the studies that were done about, the Chinese brainwashing and CIA, what CIA came to understand. It is all over these trainings. Oy vey. I mean, just, those tactics were kind of cleaned up and polished and put into business practice.
That's right.
And it's
exactly right. There was an awful lot. I mean, in all fairness, and let's be clear that it wasn't some vast conspiracy or something. When we talk about this stuff, it was a progression of ideas and research and social science and military intelligence research as well. And MK Ultra got into this mix too. And when the CIA gets involved, things go south very quickly. So all of them were in the mix, right? But there was an awful lot of attention being put on from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the subject of manipulation and conditioning. And it was all the rage in psychology and B.F. Skinner and the Skinner box. And there was just all kinds of behavioral sciences and the sort of beginnings of all that, really, let's figure this out and let's get military applications for it and all of that. And we had research being done of what other countries were doing. America was not about brainwashing people, but China was. And that's really where it comes from and comes out of. And there's a tremendous amount to know about it. I'm really, really glad to hear you're diving down those rabbit holes, because it's a deep well and it's a complicated one.
Well, just starting to see, all the kind of connections and where we've kind of learned about some of this stuff. And then we try to, I think, create better applications, as it were. Like, well, that stuff was used for evil, but could it be used for good? Versus I'm kind of exploring, okay, this stuff I thought was for good, but I can see where it was also used for evil, so it's kind of the flip side of that coin. And that's, again, that's what it's all about.
Could be very useful stuff.
Yeah.
The psychology is the psychology. It's value free. It's not, it's not like, if you repeat things over and over and over again, somebody's going to think it's true. Well, good. There's good ways to use that in education.
In your relationship, keep telling the one you love that you love them.
Yeah. Tell your kids you love them. I mean, there's lots of positive uses of that piece of information. And then there's what the predators do with it. And that's what we're all about.
Ding, ding, ding. You just nailed it. Yeah. And I just finished John's Atac's great book, Opening Our Minds. And I really love that, he kept saying the thing, there's predators and prey. There's predators and prey. There's predators and prey. And I'm one of those people who, inside of my quest to not be my mother, never be a victim, be 100% responsible for everything, total autonomy, because Jesus gave it to me, don't you know? Okay, for those of you listening to this on podcast, you just have to go watch on YouTube to see Chris's face right now. So, but that really was, Roxanne, my dear friend, she always says to me, Anne, you puppies and rainbows, like you and your puppies and rainbows. And I'm like, and I like that about myself, so I don't particularly want to fully lose that. But I couldn't imagine that. I really, honestly, it's really been this last year since my book came out, and so many people started calling me and telling me about, the husband that, ended up trying to, raping them and trying to kill them, but that they stayed with for 5 years because they could be causing the matter of that relationship turning around. They didn't. There's a danger about the no value thing that we could probably do a whole other show on, but because that's very pervasive in the human potential movement too. It's not about good or bad. It's not, take the value out, take the judgment out, take all that. Okay, again, there's some times where that can be useful, but there's also times where that's dangerous.
Right.
I remember when
the context always matters with any of these rules, any of these principles, always matters. They don't teach it to you contextually. That's why I keep stressing it. And I just say it over and over and over again, because when I repeat things, they get through to people.
Well, okay, so you just brought up the C word. I was going to save this one for next time, but we got to touch on it. We can go into it deeper next time because we're getting kind of long here. But so another major cliche in the landmark world, and this is one of the first ones I started to take apart, which is context is decisive. And I started to take it apart when I was reading actually a fantastic book by Emily Nagasaki, who anything Emily Nagasaki writes, you should read. It's fantastic. She's amazing. And, but in this particular book, she is talking about context. She's talking about trauma, and she's talking about context. And she has a really simple kind of way of explaining context, and she has it cited to many academics. But context is the combination of the circumstances and how I'm seeing the circumstances, or how I'm relating to the circumstances, the combination of those things. And I was like blown away when I read that. Because in landmark, context is synonymous with how you're seeing it. They only teach one half of that equation. That's what's meant by context is decisive. How I have complete dominion over how I see it, how I'm related to it. They evoke Viktor Frankl and that how I see it is everything. But okay, that's really great until just talk to any person who's in a disadvantaged class or group and try and tell them context is just like
context in that sense sort of means perspective or viewpoint.
All the perspective or viewpoint side. So in Emily Nagasaki,
that word means
that's not what it. So what does context?
There it is
mean?
again.
I got
the loaded language. There it is again.
Really? Okay. So what does context actually mean?
It's the words around something that give it meaning or form, or the things or circumstances or events around a thing that give it meaning and
so like,
or understanding, how you understand the thing.
So the situation, the circumstance, the thing is the 50-50 part of the equation. is the way I'm hearing that, right?
That's right.
Yeah, see, that was my
This in and of itself doesn't mean anything unless you understand that a book goes here.
Okay. Book stand holding up for those
That's the context of this thing, right?
But you can't separate context meaning from the thing. Can you?
You can. The thing exists in and of itself.
Okay.
Right?
Does the
Has
meaning?
no context.
Does the meaning?
So it has whatever meaning you assign to it.
Okay.
Right? This could be anything.
Okay.
But when I put a book and it together, now the book is giving it a more defined meaning, a more specific function or purpose.
Gotcha.
Right? Context. The book introduces context. It adds an additional factor that improves or limits or somehow modifies your understanding of the thing.
Very interesting. So it's almost like coming at it from the other direction, right? So the rain is giving me, we're having big storms here in Dallas today, right? So the rain or the storms are giving me the context. The meaning is rising to meet the thing itself. Yeah. So it's the dance between the two. And I can see I can shift my perspective. I can have a rainy day ruin my day, or I'm from Seattle. I actually like rainy days. It's a good day for movies and knitting. So I live in Dallas now. Every once in a while we have a rainy day and I'm like, oh, thank God. Because it's to relax.
Right. So the guy out fixing the power poles in the middle of the storm, that context suddenly changes the entire view of the storm. Same storm,
actually,
sitting in your home, all wrapped up in front of the fire with the cat and the book. That's the context that changes everything about that exact same storm. So
okay, so I hope Brian Arbor. I just did a conversation with a friend, new friend Brian Arbor, who did a lot of. He did a bunch of landmark, got called up, went on 4 tours of duty in Afghanistan, came back, active duty, National Guard, but went into active duty for 4 tours, came back, also a gay man, right? So he's dealing with doesn't fit, and this was in the don't ask, don't tell era. And then comes back and then goes right back and ends up going on staff for Landmark and da-da-da. And this context thing, it's really interesting. If you were to listen to my interview, my conversation with him, it's really interesting because he kept talking about the context that he created so that he could feel like he fit at war. He created it was like family, beauty, community, I think. Sorry, Brian, if I'm getting it wrong. I just aired these. We just put up part 2 last week. And it's interesting. He's in the midst of working through this. And part of why I wanted to talk to him is because I really wanted to explore the tools of an organization like Landmark, like, all these organizations on PTSD specifically. Because my daughter has complex PTSD. I know a lot of people, I'm getting, more and more people that I see went to Landmark to deal with some kind of trauma. And all it did was sort of put it on hold. Because the tools aren't quite right for that. They help a little bit, like they help in the moment. So yeah, he was able to get through 4 tours. It was really interesting listening to him because I learned a lot. I was like, wow, I could see both how that context, family, beauty, it gave him kind of actions. It gave him a way to survive that situation in the moment.
Of course.
But it also set up a bunch of problems because it wasn't really true. Like it's not family there, yes, there is beauty. He just published this beautiful piece about the beauty of the desert or whatever. But that was all his attempt to create a context that made that circumstance livable.
Sure.
So that seemed to me, I was like, well, that sounds pretty good. But there was kind of something about it too. But I'm like, but wait a minute, is that really healthy or is that not healthy? Maybe it's not that black and white.
Individual. When it comes to something that intense, that filled with anxiety and danger, actual physical danger.
Yeah.
It's so individual from person to person to person. You have to deal with the person in front of you.
Right. And the moment, I think that's a big piece of what you're pointing to too, the moment. So what might be right in this moment isn't necessarily right in that moment.
Absolutely.
Like my other friend who was creating a context for her relationship with her husband, that so that she could try and stay and hold the marriage together and da-da-da-da-da. But that person has no interest in that. They're not a partner in that context, in that creation, right? Or in that view. So then you're just kind of in a magical thinking sort of space. And that's the trick maybe to know when it's tipped over into magical thinking.
Well, that's exactly when. And I it's hard in the moment to, have some big philosophical analysis of what's going on in front of you, right? But I think if excuse me, I think if we were a little bit more willing to acknowledge the randomness of circumstance, right? The
Mm,
fact that people luck into their positions far more than they are skillfully,
right.
making their way through life. If we acknowledge that the genetic lottery and the socioeconomic lottery are major factors in your childhood development and therefore the rest of your life in determining who you are, if we could, and these are random things. You don't get to decide, and you never did, what language you were going to speak, what school you were going to go to, what family you were going to be born in. None of that was.
Yeah, how happy are we to go back to your episode last week, which I loved. Everybody should listen to your rant. But, I literally have been like, okay, I'm really glad that I was born a white woman in this era right now, because if
Mm,
I was a brown person, from Mexico,
be
that
rougher.
that'd be much rougher. And they don't have much to say about that. Right. So, yeah, there's a whole other,
There's a lot to.
but that's an obvious example. Like, we're all seeing that happen in front of us right now. Like, there are people who are being harmed, and that's why it's important to be an ally. That's why it's important for me. It's important to understand that we're all in this together, and
Yeah.
how it goes for the least of us is ultimately how it goes for the most of us. It's not, we're not separate from that. It's going to impact us at some point, if nothing other than we have less social security, less economics, less employees. I mean, I could go down the list. So
Oh,
I live in Texas. Texas will fall apart without immigration. Yeah,
no,
that,
this is just, and this is just the run up to stuff coming in the future that's going to be not so great. So we
yeah,
need to understand this stuff and get our wits around it. And I'm doing my best.
it's a way bigger,
Cool.
folks, than just
And
about.
you're awesome.
It's way bigger. We got to understand this stuff if we're going to survive, and not more importantly, if our children. I have 5 grandchildren. And I want them to have a shot at the kind of life that I've had. And I love, our indigenous friends. They think 7 generations out. It would behoove us to start thinking that way. Awesome. Well, Chris, this has been so great. One of my favorite things to do is nerd out with Chris on distinctions or tech or whatnot. And this opportunity came up. So thanks for doing this. And I'm sure we'll have many more to come. And I will have in the show note ways for folks to get in touch with you. And anyway, how to listen to
Oh,
your
yeah.
awesome
Thanks.
podcasts as well. Thank you so much.